Today we're going to start our technical theater unit with a little bit of an overview about production organization. We're going to briefly go over the roles and responsibilities of different members of the production team. We're actually going to go more in depth about how they design their work and how they implement their work in later presentations and later activities. So today we're just going to briefly go over kind of who's in charge of who and who's in charge of what. Okay, so in class we did a picture activity and we talked about what makes an effective leader. An effective leader needs to be a good communicator, and they need to be able to communicate clearly their idea to their staff. So if you are in a position of leadership, you need to be able to communicate in a clear manner exactly what you expect of the people that you are working with. That's going to be key in anything that you do for tech theater, because you have to work with a lot of different people from a lot of different departments. So communicating your idea is going to be essential. Okay, so theater is collaborative. We never do it alone. There's no such thing as being a one-man show. Being backstage means being surrounded by people who assume a wide variety of titles and responsibilities. There are constant overlaps between areas of responsibilities, and many things must be worked out on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes a simple task requires input from many departments. So for example, if the script calls for a lamp to be sitting on a table, who is in charge of it? You might instantly think of, well, it's a lamp, so it's going to be the lights or the props. But think about this. So the scenic designer shows the design to the prop master. So the scenic designer has to design the lamp, and then they have to show that design to the prop master, who has to either buy the item, pull it from stock, or build it. Then the finished lamp is brought to the stage, where the electricians wire it up. The lighting designer decides how big of a bulb to put in it and when it should be on, with more input from the director. The lighting designer then communicates that information to the light board operator, who, under the direction of the stage manager, operates the lights during the show. If the light has to move during a scene change, that task is the responsibility of a stage crew chief. One object, 8 people. You can see how easily, without communicating to the wrong person, can make the item go very wrong during a show. So that's why it's essential, no matter what area of tech, or even if you're an actor, that you know who is in charge of what, so you know who to talk to first, or who to talk to in general, who can talk to the other people about it as well. If we are working together, it must be a predetermined areas of responsibility and lines of communication. We're going to go over what departments are in charge of what, as well as who is specifically in charge of that department, has what responsibilities, and who is in charge of who. Okay, so we are going to go over the producer, public relations, house manager, and box office manager specifically in this presentation. The technical director we'll get to in the second half, but let's talk about some of these positions in yellow. So your producer is in charge of your technical director, and your managing director. Your managing director is your marketing and business director of the entire show. So they're in charge of the marketing director and the business manager, and they're in charge of making sure that they stick within budget, that they stay with the ideas of the show, and they're in charge of everything that those two departments do. The marketing director is going to be in charge of any promotions and public relation. We'll get in public relations specifically, but the marketing director is going to be essentially in charge of the marketing of the show. So what posters are going to be designed, what radio stations are going to promote the show, what commercials may be run, what ads are going to be run, what kind of fundraising activities are they going to do. They're in charge of that kind of a thing. Then the business manager is in charge of 2 departments. One is accounting, which is just like your accounting department in any other show. They're in charge of making sure that whatever needs to get paid as far as expenditures gets paid, that payroll is paid, that salary is paid, that human resources is taken care of accordingly. They're in charge of that section. And they're also in charge of the house manager. And the house manager is going to be in charge of 2 things. One is the ushers, and one is the box office manager. So the ushers are going to help seat people during the show. They're going to hand out any programs that there is. And then we'll talk about the box office manager more specifically. Okay, so the producer is in charge of deciding and approving what play will be done. They're in charge of choosing the production team. Usually they're in charge of hiring these first two people, the technical director and the managing director, and often the director of the show. And then from there, the people below them hire the people below them. So usually the technical director will hire everyone that's below them. Usually the managing director, depending on the space for the show, is already existing, and all of the marketing director staff and the business manager and their staff are already existing within that playhouse already. So usually the producer hires the technical director and the director for that show, but it really varies on a case-by-case basis. They're also responsible for the budget. They communicate the vision to the director. In school theater programs, these responsibilities typically belong to the district and the theater teacher. So the district is responsible for setting a budget. They're responsible for hiring the director, and then the theater teacher, who is the director, is responsible for choosing and approving the play and for casting the show and putting students or other adults into the other roles. And they're definitely responsible for maintaining the budget. Okay, the public relations team advertises the show, and they act as a spokesperson for the production. So if there's any PR type events like radio stations, TV shows, they'll be the ones to be on those commercials, those radio shows, those news briefs, that kind of a thing. And you have the house manager, who is in charge of the box office and lobby and crews for both. They communicate with the stage manager before the show and during intermission, and they oversee the box office manager. The box office manager in the box office itself is in charge of ticket sales, so they're in charge of processing all ticket sales, making sure that everyone has a ticket for the show, that it's the right ticket, that payments are processed correctly. If it's a larger theater place, then they also can sell subscriptions to shows, so maybe the place has a season of shows like the Muni or the Fox, and they can sell entire seasons of those shows as well. And they do any group sales and sales made the night of the show. Okay, so now we're going to talk more about who the technical director is in charge of. So we're going to talk about all the designers for the show, and we're going to talk about actors. We won't really talk about assistant stage managers. We'll talk about what the stage manager does, but the assistant stage managers will basically do anything that the stage managers need them to do. So any task that the stage manager needs assistance with, they will do that, and they're also going to be backstage during the show. Okay, so let's start with the technical director. They oversee all technical crews and personnel. They ensure that a budget is followed and that everything is on time. They oversee all designers and ensure their work meets a unified concept. And they oversee all technical crews during production, and they're in charge of how the set will be built. So they're in charge of ensuring the safety of the scene shop and overall that everything is making one unified show where it's all going to look good together. And they're in charge of making sure that the set actually gets built according to plan. And you have the director, who, as we talked about in a previous unit, the director is the liaison between all people working a show. They have say on all elements of the creative concept. They communicate concepts to all parties on the production team. They cast the show. They interpret the text. They work to stay within budget, and they communicate their vision to the designers. Okay, then you have the assistant director, which serves the director to help rehearsals to run efficiently. They share directorial duties whenever needed. They offer creative input and perspective, and sometimes they lead warm-ups. So if you have an assistant director for your show, you can use them for artistic ideas, so you can ask them their opinion on how a scene is looking, and you can also use them to do pullouts with actors. So maybe one part isn't running really well, or one actor really needs help with their lines. You can have them perform those responsibilities while you're still watching the entire rest of the show. Okay, next we're going to talk about the stage management team. The stage management team is in charge of rehearsal schedules, running the rehearsal itself, providing assistance to the director, and they're in charge of backstage during the production. As far as who works on the show, usually there is at least one assistant stage manager. The ASM or ASMs are the go-fors, and they assist the SM with their responsibilities. Some companies also have a production stage manager who oversees the entire production process. The production stage manager works for the producer and moves from show to show, releasing day-to-day control to the stage manager when it opens in a regional theater. The production stage manager is in charge of the entire season, while each show has its own stage manager. So basically, if there's a production stage manager, they're going to be in charge of more of the rehearsal process, and the stage manager will be in charge of the day-to-day stage management duties. When in doubt, ask the stage manager. So if you're unsure what department should be in charge of what, you're going to ask the stage manager first, because they can likely communicate to all of the designers easily, or ask the director what they think they should do. So if you have any questions about who you should ask the stage manager first, and they'll guide you in a better direction. Okay, so the stage manager communicates with the director, technical director, and assistant director. They oversee all technical crews during a performance. They call the show, which we'll talk about more when we get to the stage manager section. They're responsible for the smooth running of the show. They're the liaison between the actors and the director, and they're in charge of all the paperwork for the production, which when we get to the stage management section, you'll see is quite a substantial amount of paperwork. And then there's also the run crew. So the run crew is going to be the ones that set up the pieces for the performance, that maintain set pieces during a performance, and they report to the stage manager. So they're the ones during the show that actually moves the pieces to different places on stage. Okay, next we're going to talk about the sound department. The sound department is in charge of microphones, sound effects, the playback of recorded sound, and headsets for backstage communication. Sound is often a one-person operation, but sometimes it's broken into a separate sound engineer and a sound designer or board operator. The sound designer creates all sound effects. They organize all the sound effects into cues. They create atmosphere through sound. They collaborate with the directors and other designers to support the concept, and they communicate with the technical director. The sound crew interprets the sound cue documents. They run the cues during a performance, and they report to the technical director. Next, we have the costume department. They're in charge of any type of clothing or anything worn by a performer, including mask and jewelry. Makeup usually falls under the costume department, but has a separate designer and crew. The costume department is designed by the costume designer and is managed by the costume shop manager, who is assisted by a first hand, as well as cutters, stitchers, and drapers. During the run of the show, costumes are handled by the costume mistress and dressers. So the costume department is one of the bigger departments because designing and building costumes is a time-consuming process. So they have a lot of people to help them design and make the costumes, as well as ensure the costumes are well kept during the show and are repaired as needed and help the actors change in and out of costumes. The costume designer is in charge of designing the costumes for a production. They communicate with the other designers to ensure a unified concept is made, and they're the ones who create the costume plot. The costume mistress is in charge of costumes during a production. They keep the costume plot, and they oversee the costume crew. So they make sure all the costumes get turned in every night, that they're all in good working order, that they're still up to the quality that they should be. And then you have the costume crew, who's in charge of repairing costumes, adjusting costumes for fit. Sometimes they assist with the wigs, and they're separated into cutters, drapers, and stitchers who make the costumes. Then you have a dresser, who assists actors getting in and out of costumes, especially with quick changes, and they do quick repairs between shows. And the dresser actually reports to the stage manager, so that way if there's some sort of cue that has to happen when an actor gets into a different costume, that is done on the right moment and the cue doesn't go early, because no one knows if the actor is ready or not. Okay, and then on the makeup section, you usually have a makeup designer, especially if it's a production that has a lot of makeup involved with it. They design the makeup looks for a production. They communicate with the designers, particularly costume, to ensure a unified concept is maintained. They create makeup renderings. They're responsible for developing specialty looks when needed, so like blood and gore and old age and anything that's going to change the face and the shape of the actor. And they communicate with the technical director. Then you have makeup artists who develop the makeup looks. They collaborate with the costume crew, and they communicate with the technical director to ensure accuracy of makeup. Okay, then you have the lighting department. They're in charge of anything electrical that is not sound. Lighting is designed by the lighting designer and managed by the master electrician with the assistance of electricians. The lights are operated by a light board operator, and if spots are used, the follow spot operators. The lighting designer designs the lighting look for production, communicates with other designers to ensure a unified concept is maintained, creates a light plot, attends rehearsals, and communicates with the technical director. Often the lighting designer will be the last designer to be hired and the last designer to begin work on the show, because most of the other lighting processes have to be done after all the other technical crews are done. So you can't design lights without knowing what the set's going to look like, without knowing what the ground plan's going to look like, and without knowing what the costumes are going to look like. So the lighting designer is usually one of the last designers to be hired for a show. Then you have the master electrician, who is going to interpret and hang the light plot, determine channels and dimmers, and add them to the light plot. They report to the technical director, and they oversee the electricians. The lighting crew and the electricians assist the master electrician with the focusing of the light plot. The light board operator will run the light board during a performance. They maintain lighting instruments during a run, and they report to the stage manager. Okay, then you have the scenery department, which is going to be another large department, because they're in charge of all the background furniture, flats, doors, platforms, etc. So the scenery is designed by the set designer and managed by the technical director. The scenery is built in the scene shop. The shop often has a scene shop manager or master carpenter. They're also in charge of the paint shop, which the scenic artists paint and decorate. During the run, the stage crew handles the scenery, and flying scenery is operated by a flyman. So they often have a bigger crew because they have to build all elements of the show. So the scenic designer designs the set for the production. They communicate with the other designers to ensure a unified concept is maintained. They create ground plans, elevation, perspective drawings. They attend rehearsals, and they communicate with the technical director. The lead carpenter interprets and articulates the scenic documents, builds the set and anything that appears permanent to the audience with the set crew. They oversees the set crew, and they report to the technical director, who ensures that the set is safe. The set crew builds the set, creates anything that appears permanent to the audience, and works under the lead carpenter. Last department we have is props. Anything that can be carried on by an actor is a prop. Pictures on the wall, for example, could be a prop because an actor could move it. However, a couch is scenery because even though the actor could physically carry it on, it is unlikely that would happen in the context of the play. The distinction between props and scenery is often unclear and should be discussed early in the production process. So it's really important that you decide what the props crew is going to handle and what the set crew is going to handle, and whether or not something is a set or a prop. Props are designed by the prop designer and managed by the prop master. During the show, the props are handled by the props crew. So the props designer is in charge of designing the props, building or pulling the props, making and keeping a props list, communicating and delegating to the props crew. They report to the technical director, and they attend rehearsal and provide rehearsal props. So sometimes if a prop is too large or is very difficult to bring to and from the rehearsal space, the props designer will design something that is similar in size and fashion, but is easier to bring to the rehearsal space for the purpose of rehearsals. So the actors get used to having the prop without having to actually physically bring it to and from. So then you have the props crew, who maintains and organizes props, set up the props table, and assists the props master in development and location of props.